On today's episode of Gridiron Guys, we are going to be discussing the top 12 rookie wide receivers and how we rank them going into this fantasy season. And boys, there are a lot of talent right here with a really, really good wide receiver class coming into the NFL this year. We have CeeDee Lamb as our number one wide receiver for fantasy football next year. Kevin, just give us a quick synopsis on the team fit and what we expect from CeeDee Lamb this coming season.
Yep. So CeeDee Lamb, arguably one of the biggest steals in the first round, as a few teams passed up on him. He's going to Dallas with new coach Mike McCarthy, who has a great plan for wide receivers. Dak loves to air the ball out. Should he be the quarterback? I would assume he will. But CeeDee Lamb is going to get a lot of targets. Him, Michael Gallup, and Amari Cooper could pose as potentially the best trio in football if everything pans out. So expect a lot of targets for CeeDee Lamb. He's going to be playing a lot of the slot too, which he's been known to be best at. He's very shifty. So who knows? He'll also be wearing number 88, a legendary number in Dallas.
Yeah, I think Lamb is going to be probably the most consistent receiver coming into the league from week one, just because Dallas throws a lot of passes. I think Dak Prescott was close to a 5,000 yard passer, if not a 5,000 yard passer last season. And I expect Lamb never to be getting an extremely high target share, may never see 10 plus in a game, but I think he's going to get a consistent anywhere from 4 to 8 on a weekly basis. And that will lead to a very consistent fantasy approach with also a pretty decent upside because if Gallup or Cooper are to go down, he's sliding into a really, really high volume passing offense, and he's a great talent. He may not be ready for wide receiver one corners in the NFL, but I think he's going to come in to a high passing offense and get consistent targets from day one. I like him at his ADP of 112. It's a good value fit for a backup wide receiver with upside that we don't with rookie upside as you always get from talented first round picks coming into the league. And next, as our wide receiver two for next year of all rookies, we have Justin Jefferson. And Justin Jefferson currently has an ADP of 143. But we love Jefferson because he has a great team fit going into next year. With the departure, or rather, should I say, trade of Stephon Diggs, Jefferson is sliding into that role from the get go. He is an immense talent. He fits exactly what Minnesota's going to want to do. And I think with their run oriented offense, teams are going to struggle to cover Thielen and Jefferson. And I think Jefferson's primed for a lot of targets. And if his talent is what it was in college, he could be putting up a 1,000 yard season come this fall. I think Jefferson has the best fit out of all these wide receivers, and I really like him and Kirk going into next year.
Yeah, me too. I really like Kirk's fit with Justin Jefferson. Jefferson is one of the most pristine route runners I've seen in a while. Uh, Gary Kubiak, the offensive coordinator from Minnesota, said the night of the draft that they were thrilled to get him because he already has hundreds of plays ready for him that just fit his game. So I'm really excited to see his fit. I could see him being one of the top receivers at the end of the season if all goes well.
Yeah, I think not only for rookies, but I think as for fantasy in general, he could end the year as a high wide receiver two option because I think Minnesota is a really good offense. They're playing in a dome. He has talent. The fit is there. We saw what Diggs' role was. He's taking over that role. Thielen went down last year. Jefferson is primed for a big season. He has a great ADP, great value, and I really like the pick at 143 if you can get him in those later rounds. But now our wide receiver three is Jerry Jeudy. Going to the Denver Broncos, they have assembled a wide receiver core that is much improved last year with the addition of him and KJ Hamler. And I think some may question why we have Jeudy at 3. Possibly they think he should be at 1. But we have Jeudy all the way down at 3. It's because Drew Lock and the Denver Broncos are going to be, I think, a run first offense next year. And I think Drew Lock is getting a little bit too much hype after his 5 game, I guess you can say, debut last year. And Judy's going to be going in as a wide receiver 2. Hamler's going to be kind of a 2A, but he'll be playing the slot. But I think Judy's targets aren't going to be extremely high, and the Denver offense may not be a high-scoring offense, which limits his upside. He's a great talent, but I think early on this season he may not be seeing great fantasy production, and I think it might be a buy low target towards the middle of the year once maybe the Drew Lock starts to get into the swing of things and they start straying from the run. But I think Judy's a great talent. I just don't know how I see him starting off the year because I don't think Denver's offense is going to be really a pass first offense and a high volume offense to benefit Judy.
Yeah, the drafting Jerry Judy is, I think it's going to be a good pick regardless because on one hand, you're probably going to get him to be a second flex or a bench stash with a guy, and he's a guy who has a lot of upside. Drafting him is based on the potential that Drew Lock has, and I guess you can say the Broncos are ready to go to battle with Drew Lock as they're locked and loaded with that was bad. They're putting all their eggs in one basket. That Drew Lock's going to be the future quarterback, and drafting Jerry Judy, basically, his potential and production is going to come on if Drew Lock is the real deal. And I think if Drew Lock can do it, Jerry Judy is a great route runner, and route running usually translates to great production in the NFL. So
Yeah, if you're betting on Drew Lock, you're betting on Jerry Judy, and I think he'll be much better in PPR than standard. I don't know how many touchdowns he'll be seeing next year compared to the top two guys who have much higher touchdown potential, but I could see him being a great PPR play as a flex throughout the season just because I think his route running will translate to a bunch of mid passes where Cortland Sutton and KJ Hamler get those deep balls. But if you're betting on Drew Lock, you're betting on Jerry Judy, and I think he has great upside later down the year. Now, our wide receiver four for fantasy rookies may come as a surprise to some. We have Jalen Reagor. With an ADP of 181, Reagor is almost an undrafted player. He's maybe at the very end of your bench, depending on how big a bench your league carries. But I personally think Reagor is primed for a really big fantasy season because people sleep on Carson Wentz and the Philadelphia Eagles offense. Everyone has a bad taste left in their mouth because the lackluster wide receiver core they had last year. And it's still, other than Reagor, not very good. Alshon Jeffrey has been injury prone and he's past his days. Deshaun Jackson, you never know he's going to stay on the field. Reagor is a guy coming in who could see 100 plus targets week one. I mean, throughout the season if he stays healthy. And guys like Greg Ward, I'm pretty sure last year for Philly were putting up numbers. I mean, I think this Eagles offense is going to be much better than it was last year. Will we be seeing MVP Carson Wentz? I don't think so. But in a pretty good offense, I think Reagor is going to get a lot of targets. He's an explosive playmaker, and I think they wanted him. They took him over Jefferson, and I think they really plan to implement him in a big way in their offense next year. I think he's a lead upside, but he also can be a big bust player because Alshon Jeffrey and Deshaun Jackson could have decent years, and Philly does have two tight ends they like to throw to. I think Reagor's boomer bust, but at 181, I think he has loads of potential that you have to swing on, and I think he's a great fit in that Philly offense.
yeah, I like Rager a lot. I think he's going to ultimately be Deshaun Jackson's replacement. But I think the goal for the Eagles this offseason was to get somebody that Carson Wentz can basically grow up with. I think Rager is a great addition. He's got speed. I think there were a little bit of concerns with his catching, but that can get fixed. These are all of his problems are fixable problems, and the sky's the limit for him. He's going to get a good target share, which puts him higher than most receivers up here, and he's on a playoff team, the Eagles, so expect a lot out of him.
I also think it helps that he's in the NFC East facing three very lackluster secondaries in the Giants, Redskins, and Cowboys. He's going to have a lot of favorable matchups. I think a lot of teams don't view him as an elite talent as the Eagles do. So I think he'll get a lot of good matchups. And he might be primed for some boomer bust weeks throughout the season. But I could see Rieger having a Terry McLaurin-like season next year, showing some insane potential, but then fizzling out in some games where the fantasy, I guess, matchup isn't to his liking. But I think Rieger's great value at 181. Moving on, we have Henry Ruggs, the first wide receiver drafted off the board in the 2020 NFL Draft, running a blazing 4.22 40. I think Ruggs maybe a bit low on this list, but that's just because he's not an orthodox receiver. He's not the typical route running 6 foot guy who's going to get those first downs. He is a straight burner, and I think it's going to take him a little bit of time to adjust to the NFL. But if Ruggs can get in there right away, start getting some explosive plays, he's going to get a lot of targets, I think. John Gruden is going to utilize him in every aspect, possibly even as a returner. I think it just comes down to will his game be able to translate with no hiccups come the first 8 weeks of the season, and how will Derek Carr and the Raiders' passing game look with him in it? Kevin, what would you like to say about your new
Well,
addition to your squad?
as a Raider fan, I am thrilled because the one thing we have been missing is speed on offense. We need speed on offense, and we got it. People forget that in Derek Carr's, I think he would have won MVP that year had he not gotten hurt. He was great at throwing the deep ball, and he hasn't had anybody to throw it to. I mean, early on in the season when Tyrell was healthy, he was able to get him on the deep ball a lot. But I mean, how many people have heard of Johnny Holton, Rico Gafford, not Todd Davis, Tyler Davis? Those are his speed guys. And Derek Carr has hit him for a few touchdowns, but most of the time the connection's not there because those guys are terrible. Adding adding Henry Ruggs is going to be huge, and when he's not on the field, the Raiders' offense, like Josh Jacobs, the running plays are going to be better. We are a run-first team. That's why Ruggs falls here. But Ruggs has a lot of potential. I think a quarter of the time at Bama, he got a touchdown when he touched the ball. That's ridiculous. I would expect him to get a lot of deep balls. I think he's going to have a very similar season to Marquise Brown, if I were going to compare him to anybody.
Yeah, that's a good comparison. I think his success will translate with the Raiders. If the Raiders have a struggling offense, I think Ruggs will struggle too.
Mm-hmm.
And we have Rieger over Ruggs just because of the value.
Yeah, he's not a great
Ruggs being
fantasy pick, but in real life, I think he'll be much better than his fantasy value.
Yeah, with Rieger having an ADP 41 back of Ruggs, I think the fit is much better with the ADP. But I think Ruggs has really, really good potential for next year. It may take him some time to put it all together. As Kevin mentioned, scoring a touchdown on 25% of his plays may not be so easy to do that in the NFL, and he may have to switch up his game a little bit, and his fantasy production may take some time to get to where he wants to be. But another wide receiver who's a big play guy drafted in the end of the first round, or in the first round, is Brandon Ayuk. Going into a San Fran team that desperately needed a wide receiver, losing Emmanuel Sanders. I think, at least I have faith in Ayuk because Kyle Shanahan. He knows how to get the most out of his playmakers. Ayuk is dynamic. He was a run after the catch king last year in college. Great returner. And with an ADP of 218, you're basically drafting him in the last round. If he's not going undrafted in deeper leagues, he may be drafted. I just think there is so much volume to go around for this wide receivers in San Fran. Deebo Samuel is a screen guy primarily, getting some downfield action last year. But Ayuk might be this deep threat in a San Fran offense that is run first, and Kittle's probably their number one option. But Emmanuel Sanders had a great fantasy season last year, and I think San Fran may look to pass a bit more to get some faith in Jimmy G because he choked that Super Bowl and he wants some confidence going into this season. And I think Ayuk might be a deep ball guy this year, might be a returner, will be great in a scheme game. I think on most other teams, Ayuk isn't a great fit, but on San Fran, I really like what he can do with Jimmy G, and I think Kyle Shanahan's in his scheme up some great plays for him to get the ball. Also, great value at 218. You're basically paying nothing for a share in a good offense.
Yeah, this is phenomenal value to get Brandon Ayuk at. When you get praise from John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan saying that this guy's the best receiver in the class, and they were comfortable taking him at 24 over, even at 13, they said they would have taken him if they knew he wasn't going to be there later on. But when Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch, who have scouted many, many players and have found very good pieces, and they say Brandon Ayuk is the best receiver in a loaded class, I have a lot of praise for Brandon Ayuk. This dude's going to be a stud. I mean, I don't know how much more I have to say. I think he's going to be a great fit in San Francisco.
Yeah, I also think he might be pretty good in PPR compared to standard. I think he's gonna be catching a lot of short balls, screen passes, little like flea flicker type passes behind the line of scrimmage. That might give him anywhere from 70 to 80 catches on the year, which is really solid for a late round pick. And he's going to take a lot of those to the house because he has blazing speed. He's going to be in the return game too. I think at 140 his ADP, he would not be so high on this list, but at 220, 8, 9 rounds later, he could be putting up seasons that are as good as Judy, Lamb, and Jefferson because he's going to be in a great offense and especially a great scheme for a wide receiver of his ability. Ayuk is great value, and I really think that you should look to add him at the end of your fantasy drafts this year. Now we have a player who is going to an extremely crowded wide receiver room. The opposite of Brandon Ayuk is T. Higgins. With the rookie #1 pick, we have Joe Burrow and T. Higgins going to Cincinnati Bengals. And I think the thing for Higgins this year is he going to see the field a lot because he's going into a team with AJ Green, Tyler Boyd, and John Ross. And if those three guys are healthy next year, T. Higgins is not going to see very many targets whatsoever. Maybe will not even see 50 targets. But the thing is, all three of those guys have had some injury concerns throughout their careers. And I think T. Higgins is a great talent, and I think the Bengals are going to be passing a lot. So if at an ADP of 210, his value may not be great, but if you think taking a flyer on a guy like T. Higgins because you think AJ Green and John Ross are going to go down, it could be a potentially really good pick. But there's also the potential that he never sees the field and the opportunity isn't really there. I think that's I think there's better options than T. Higgins probably that late in the draft. But if you are betting against AJ Green and John Ross for this season, I think T. Higgins, the talent is there. Joe Burrow is going to be looking to make a good rookie connection with T. Higgins. And I think if those two guys are to go down, he's going to be in for a great season, especially with the value of 210 at his ADP.
Yeah, T. Higgins is a great wide receiver. I don't know about his value for this year, for like you said. Um, I I just don't really see him getting on the field a lot, like you said, barring injury or, I mean, let's be honest, the Bengals are not going to be a great team this year. They're still going through the rebuilding phase, but uh, you know, maybe at the end of the season, if they're losing games, they'll start playing him a lot more. They also have Auden Tate too, who's a very similar role, but I think T. Higgins is most likely going to have small volume in the wide receiver room in his first season, whereas next year I would expect him to take a huge leap. So this is a good keeper or dynasty pick. But if you can grab him late, or if he goes undrafted, maybe later on in the season, stash him because he's going to be good in the future. I just don't know about this year.
Yeah, I would like to agree with that. Probably not the best pick for this year. Has a lot of potential, but in Dynasty especially, you're going to be getting great value because there's a lot of rookie wide receivers who are going to be taking the headlines for all these Dynasty drafts. And Higgins is a guy who can go under the radar and really build a rapport with Joe Burrow for 10 years to come. Now, a wide receiver who's going into another great fit, unlike T. Higgins, is Michael Pittman. Being drafted in the top of the second round, he's going into a Colts offense that needed a playmaker at wide receiver. Sliding in next to T.Y. Hilton, I think Pittman has a great fit. I think the issue here is the Colts are going to be a very run-heavy team, and I think Philip Rivers is past his days. Kevin thinks differently, but I think Michael Pittman at an ADP around 170 has good value. The thing is Philip Rivers going to be able to get him the ball? Is the Colts offense going to be able to pass at least at a proficient level? And are they not going to be running the ball a bunch? That's why we have Michael Pittman so low. I think he's going to be a good red zone threat because with the departure of Eric Ebron, T.Y. Hilton's not a red zone threat. I think he could be catching a lot of red zone touchdowns. I think it just comes down to Philip Rivers and his success with this Colts team. So if you're a believer in Phil, I think Michael Pittman is a really good stash on the bench for this coming season with a lot of high touchdown potential. Maybe even seeing like 8 or 9 touchdowns this year.
Yeah, I really like Michael Pittman. He was one of my favorite players in this year's class. I think he's going to ball out in Indy. Who knows really what Phil's going to do? I think he's a real boomer bust QB this year. But Indy runs the same offense as LA, but they've got a better team in terms of offensive line to keep Phil up. So if I'm gonna take my bets, I think Philip Rivers and Michael Pittman will have a great connection, similar to Mike Williams. I think he can have that type of an impact. So this guy could be a late round steal if you can get him in the second to last round or something like that. I don't know. He could be a really, really good player.
Yeah, it just comes down to how many yards are the Colts going to pass for, I think, because they're going to be a run-heavy team with Jonathan
Oh
Taylor
yeah,
and Marlon Mack behind a really good
for
offensive
sure.
line. So, especially in games when they're up a lot, he may be seeing no volume, but in those games that where they're playing like Kansas City, Baltimore, he's going to be getting a lot of targets, and he's going to have a lot of scoring
Yeah, I
potential.
think
I think he's going to be having good value at the end of the
him
draft.
starting, I think he's going to start out as the number two receiver, or at least him, Ty, and Paris Campbell will most likely be the starting receivers, along with Zach Pascal. And more than likely, one of them will get hurt at some point in the season because sadly, that's how football is. So if Michael Pittman's healthy, I would expect a lot of volume out of him. I think his target shares can be really good. And like T. Higgins, he's going to be a big skyrocketer in the second season.
Yeah, I mean, it's just going to come down to if the Colts pass a
Yep.
lot. Talent's definitely there, fit's
Quarterback
definitely
play
there. It
is
just
the key concern here.
is crucial, especially for a lot of these lower tier receivers, because a lot of them are going to be seeing the field. It's
Can
just
the quarterback get it
is
to
the
him?
offense going to have enough, and is the offense have enough volume to support not a number one option, which many don't. But coming out of our wide receiver nine, we have Denzel Mims, and who knows what's happening with Jets wide receivers this year? They really don't have any, and I think Mims is a guy. Not talking about fantasy, either going to come into the league and be a star, or he's gonna be out of the league in 2 years. Like, what's the guy out of Ohio State they
Devin
drafted
Smith?
2 years ago? The speedster Devin Smith. Like that was top. That was top of the second round, same as Mims, out of the league in 2 years. I think he's a physical freak, similar to DK Metcalf last year. I just worry about the route running. Facing number one corners with really good technique. I think he would have done way better for his NFL career on a team where he's not the number one option. But I think he's going to get a ton of targets with the Jets this year. Ton of targets. Could be really high
Yeah.
upside play. But the thing is, I don't know if I think he's going to be able to perform at a wide receiver one because you're in a division who has really, really good corners. Buffalo is Tre'Davious White. New England is Stephon Gilmore. Miami, Byron Jones and Xavier Howard. Those are probably four of the top 7 or 8 guys in the league. Facing them 6 times a year. Going from playing at Baylor, running slants that you can just torch everyone because you're a physical freak, but running a 4.4 at probably 6'3" and massive, you're not able to do that against those guys. I think he's gonna have a bit of a reality check, and I think he'll do much better if another Jets wide receiver can come out and play well with him. Because if all the attention's on stopping Denzel Mims, he's gonna have a tough time. But he's gonna have a ton of targets. So if you're going strictly on upside, Mims is your guy late, I think, at an ADP of 194.
Yeah, I think the Jets are going to be in a lot of passing situations, so I could see Denzel getting a lot of reps. But personally, I'm not the biggest fan of Denzel Mims. I wasn't a huge fan of his college tape. I think he has a lot of upside, but I just don't think the Jets are the right team. I hope he proves me wrong because I don't mind the Jets, but I don't know. I'm just basing it off of previous history with the Jets. Don't get too high on Denzel Mims. They have Rashad Perriman and Jameson Crowder. Jameson Crowder took a lot of targets last year. If anything, look at him. But I think Denzel Mims as a late round flyer isn't a bad pick. I just don't think he's going to pan out to what a lot of people are hyping him up to be.
Yeah, I mean, if you're gonna draft him, you have to be okay with cutting him in a few weeks because he may catch 3 passes in the first 3 weeks, and you're just gonna have to cut
Mm,
ties. You can't have that. I'm gonna stick it out for 8 weeks. No, if he's not playing well, you have to cut him. He may not do anything the entire year, but he offers elite upside, especially at 194. Upside higher than I would say Pittman, Higgins, Ayuk, even. But it's just a boomer bust thing here. You have to be okay with cutting him if he's not good, and he's going to get a lot of targets, or he projects to get a lot of targets. Now, moving on to our wide receiver 10, will probably surprise a lot, is Van Jefferson on the LA Rams. And I personally like Van Jefferson for the Rams because I think he is going to try to fill that Brandon Cooks role last year with the departure of Todd Gurley. they're not going to be a run-heavy team. They're going to be trying to air it out like they did 2 years ago. And I think Jared Goff may not be an elite quarterback, but I think he's able to put up really, really nice passing numbers. And Sean McVay is going to put up a really nice scheme. I see the Rams in a lot of 11 personnel next year with Woods, Kupp, and Van Jefferson out there. And I think the Rams offense has showed that they're able to support three wide receivers. Last year they struggled, but 2 years ago, Cooks, Kupp, and Woods were all really fantasy relevant. And I think at basically a position that's going to go undrafted, Van Jefferson is going to probably see a decent amount of volume just because of that. So if you are lackluster on wide receivers and you're trying to get a guy who's going to get a nice target share when there's really no one left, I think he will get a decent amount of targets that people may not expect because Todd Gurley got force fed last year, and now they have Darrell Henderson who showed nothing, and Cam Akers who's more a receiving back than a runner between the tackles. I think it's reasonable that Goff might throw for 4,500 yards next year, and I think Van Jefferson will be a contributor in that. He's worth a late round flyer when it comes down to it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I really like Van Jefferson. His dad was a former NFL wide receiver, and he trains receivers now. Van Jefferson has the best route running in this class, no doubt about it. He's a little bit older, so he's a lot more experienced. He played at two different SEC schools, so his experience is better than everybody else's too. That's probably why Sean McVay, wide receiver, offensive guru, will be great fit with him. Van Jefferson's going to get a lot of targets, like you said. Pass first team. I think he's going to have a very similar role to Cooper Kupp. They're very similar players, the way that they play the game. Robert Woods is probably going to get more of like an X receiver type of role, whereas Jefferson and Kupp are going to be a little bit more in the slot. So I would expect a lot of targets for Van Jefferson. This is a guy that will most likely go undrafted and could have a lot of value come the end of the season.
I'd like to agree, especially if a guy like Cooper Kupp or Robert Woods goes down again, have been banged up over the last few years. If one of those guys goes down, he's gonna get a great target share and a pass for his team. Taking a flyer on a guy like that, it's a great idea. And I think you're able to cut him in the last round anyway because if he doesn't do well, there's not much risk at all. But you have great upside to be a very consistent play. He's not going to be ever a wide receiver to start every single time, but I think throughout the year you're definitely gonna have times against like an Arizona team where you're gonna be able to play him as a flex and be pretty confident he'll get 8 targets, maybe 60 yards and possibly a touchdown. In PPR, it might be a very nice play, especially in deeper leagues. I mean, it's not the sexy pick, but I think it has a very solid bench backup player written all over it. Now, a player that's quite opposite of a safe pick is KJ Hamler, being another rookie wide receiver for the Denver Bronco offense that I think will be a run first offense. I think Hamler may see a very small target share, especially target share this year, especially with a very I would say small skill set of being a burner Tyreek Hill type player. He's going to be a boomer bust play that I think will put up decent stats when you look at it when it's all said and done in the end of the year. But trying to predict those weeks where he catches 2 passes, maybe for 100 yards and a touchdown, isn't near impossible. I think Hamler should be going undrafted in 99% of leagues, unless it's a probably 18, 16 team league. He's probably going to be a wide receiver pickup similar to Terry McLaurin last year if he starts playing really well
Yeah,
early
I
on.
like the Terry McLaurin comparison here. The only difference I would say is that Terry McLaurin is on a absolutely horrific team, whereas the Broncos have more of a structure. And like you said, it's a run first offense here. I think KJ Hamler is going to have a good role on this team, more towards like a specialty player, kind of like Tyreek Hill, but mainly just deep routes, short little screen passes. So I wouldn't draft him because I just don't know his fantasy value yet. He's going to be a type of guy that's going to go either really late or not at all, and he'll be a waiver wire pickup, I'm sure, midseason if he pans out. But he's going to be good in the NFL. I just don't know about his fantasy value.
Yeah, I would like to agree there this year. Don't draft KJ Hamler. In our last wide receiver 12 of the rookies, we have Laviska Shenault. And honestly, he I think it's gonna be a bust. I don't think they're gonna be able to take his talent and skill set, his gifted athleteness, I guess you could say, and capitalize on that in Jacksonville, especially with the team that's gonna be down a lot and probably gonna have some locker room issues. But there is that slight potential that he can take over that wide receiver two job. Minshew did play pretty well last year, and I think he has a decent upside if everything pans out for him. But I think what's going to happen is he's going to get thrown into that mix that Jacksonville's had for I feel like 5 years, where they draft these guys in the mid round, second, third round, and they just become very, very mediocre with like Marquise Lee. Uh, their names are not coming to my head right now, but they just had a bunch of receivers over the years that they just draft mid rounds, and they're just really nothing special. I mean, I don't ever see a reason to play him, especially with Chark being their guy and Fournette being the guy they're going to be running the ball with. They're going to have a pretty bad offense and a terrible defense probably because their secondary is very bad. That might help them with passing in late game scenarios, but I just don't think he's a good fit in Jacksonville, and I think he's not going to see very much playing time at all to start the year. Probably would be a better waiver wire pickup, a guy to add to your watch list down the
Yeah,
line.
I'm not a fan of Laviska Shenault fantasy wise. I mean, he's a good person. Like, I think he's a pretty good receiver, but I just don't think he's gonna be a. I think he's a fantasy bust. Like, don't draft him. There's two, like you said, they always have this like convoluted wide receiver room. That's like five okay receivers, nobody bad, nobody great. Now they got DJ Chark, who's an emerging star, and then they got a bunch of just okay receivers. I don't think he's going to see the field that much. I just don't think he's going to be that good in general in the NFL, honestly. Now I think about it. I mean, that team's going to be dog shit. I'm sorry, but that team's going to be terrible for a couple of years. So even Dynasty, it's kind of risky, but you got to see. Because they have D.D. Westbrook, too. They just cut Marquise Lee, so maybe he takes a Marquise Lee role. I just don't know. That team's just such a question mark to me. I would stay away from it.
Yeah, I think Jacksonville's only going to be putting out one fantasy relevant wide receiver next year. And he's an ADP of 231. You're going to be spending your last round pick on him, but I wouldn't even do that at this point. But that covers our top 12 wide receivers going into next year. I think a few of these guys are bound to be real boom players next year. It is very difficult to predict because they're all very talented. They all were very high NFL picks, and they probably would have been hired if they were drafted in any other year. It just comes down to where talent meets fit and opportunity, and that's unpredictable at times with injuries and breakout games early on. But I think definitely if you're trying to win your league, taking a couple of these guys, even two or three of them as bench players, just trying to get that one breakout player is a really good idea because these are all guys getting drafted in the 9th, 10th round or later. That concludes the video. Stay tuned for tight end and quarterback rankings coming out probably this weekend or next. And that will be our rookie wide receiver, I guess, fantasy outlook, as you could say, for the 2020 season and somewhat dynasty too. Make sure to like and subscribe.